So we're going to start on the next section, the Catholic Inquisition. Catholic Inquisition, and that ran from about AD 1000 to 1700. And thankfully, we have the PowerPoint back today, so that's a blessing. It was just one little piece that apparently was what was needed, replacing a part here. And I happened to be going through Walmart, and I stopped into the electronics section. They actually had it, which surprised me. So I picked one up, but it actually worked. So I had no idea if that was the piece. It was the VGA to HDMI converter. So it was just this little piece right here. I replaced that, and that was the culprit. So we have it back. We're starting on the Catholic Inquisition, and as I said, running from about AD to AD 1000 to 1700. And the Catholic Inquisition was a very dark time for Europe and other parts around the world. It was gradually in development. So oftentimes in history, sorry, you're cut off this morning from there. That's all right. So oftentimes we look at the events themselves and we'll focus on the Inquisition, for example, and say, all right, the Inquisition took place around this time over these centuries. And oftentimes in world history, the events themselves get the focus, but many times things just don't pop out of nowhere and happen. They just don't all of a sudden surface and boom, where'd this come from out of nowhere? Most things have a gradual development. Most things have, whether it's on a bigger scale or even a smaller scale, most things have little things that then add up into bigger things, grow into bigger things, which then turns into a bigger event. And it was that way with the Inquisition. There was a gradual development in the centuries leading up to it would have been in the first millennium AD, and up until the more what we call more formally the Inquisition. And the gradual development consisted of the rise of apostasy, and a lot of this we have already covered, but it's good to just take a look back and see once again some of these things that were taking place in church history that then made it possible for the Inquisition to even happen. Because that's the whole issue. These things that promoted its gradual development, had those not happened, it would have been impossible for the Inquisition to have happened in the way that it was. And the first was the rise of apostasy, and the major thing was as the bishops took unscriptural authority and were exalted over large territories, over multiple churches, they gained in power. They became more power hungry, and so more politics got involved, and then they tended to abuse those who opposed them. In other words, when people get power hungry and they get involved in politics as far as, and I'm not talking about politics as far as our government is concerned, just using the term politics in general, because there can be politics in a church, politics in a business, politics in a government, but they get involved in the power struggles and the wheeling and dealing. They become more power hungry, and that's human nature. Is once you get involved, once you get exalted into a higher position, people then, if they're not humble, if they don't recognize their own weaknesses, and if they don't have a heart of service to others, then naturally, human nature is becoming more power hungry and then opposing and being harsh and abusing those who oppose them. And that is what these bishops, these other leaders in the Catholic Church did. And then Constantine also had a hand in this with his merger of the church and state. And he then instigated persecution against those who opposed him and them, his doctrines and his merger of church and state. And so there was already persecution going on to a certain extent before the Inquisition. And then Augustine believed in using force against heretics. In other words, compel them to come in. And that wasn't what Jesus had in mind with compelling them to come in, forcing them. But liberty of conscience is a very important doctrine, that people have the liberty, the freedom to choose for themselves as far as their, are they going to attend church? You know, people have the freedom to attend church and not attend church. And we can very strongly urge people, look, this is very important for you to be in church, or it's very important for you to trust in Christ and accept God's gift of salvation. But never are we told, commanded, or part of the Great Commission has never been said that we should force people at the edge of a sword or the barrel of a gun to go along with what we believe. And that's the exact opposite of Bible-believing Christianity. But unfortunately, a lot of the power struggles and the force, the persecution that's taken place by those throughout church history, not just what we're talking about today. Many times it gives religion a bad name, or it gives Christianity a bad name in particular. But people need to realize true Bible Christianity, that's not a hallmark of true Bible Christianity. But oftentimes people don't know the difference. They aren't going to be able to distinguish. They just know, okay, well, in the name of Christianity or in the name of God, so therefore religion's a problem and Christianity's a problem. And many times people don't make that distinction. But it is important to make that distinction. It is not a scriptural concept to use force against those that believe differently than you do. And then conditions, ripe conditions around AD 1000. Rome and the popes had amassed so much power that they were greatly feared because they were not afraid to wield the heavy hand of their authority. And we've already covered some examples of persecution instigated by numerous popes, and we looked at some individuals who were, especially as far as particularly the Waldensians, who were persecuted. And some of those would have been around that time, the Inquisition. But that's really the key here, is that had they not merged church and state, and had Rome not amassed so much power, they would not have been able to carry out the Inquisition in the way that they did. And so that is that's why power, that's why accountability is important. And Rome was certainly didn't like accountability, and really they had more power over. They had great influence over the kings, but that's because people were kept in the darkness, kept in blindness. And if they were able to go along with that, or they ended up going along with that rather than not. But these conditions made it possible for the Inquisition to take place because they were not afraid to use the heavy hand of their authority to persecute and compel and try to stamp out those who believe the Bible and who oppose the established church. So these were things that developed into the Inquisition, and then it was expanded. There was expansion by Pope Innocent. I should say Pope Innocent the Third. Pope Innocent III, at his inauguration, he preached a sermon comparing the papacy and the secular rulers to the sun and moon, meaning that the papacy was the sun and the secular rulers were the moon, which means the moon reflects the glory of the sun. And so the secular rulers just were simply meant to reflect the glory of the papacy and the religious structure, the hierarchy, the power of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. And boy, he wasn't proud, was he? No pride in his life, but absolutely, he's a very proud man. He desired to force his will upon everyone and declared that those who refused to submit to Rome's doctrine should forfeit their lives. In Church History by Blackburn, it says, religious persecution assumed new forms. The age of Innocent was one of terror to all liberty of thought and worship. And that is one of the things that is so important. and we face this issue here in the U.S. Now with the liberty of thought, and to a great degree, it's not on a national level. It's not the Roman Catholic Church that is attacking the liberty of thought, although in their own churches, I'm sure they don't necessarily want people to be thinking for themselves and think outside the papacy. But as far as across the nation, what is the greatest force? Well, it's the force of this of the progressive movement, and they say they're progressive, that they're enlightened, that they are that we're on the cutting edge, and we're going to it's a dawning of a new day, and they'll even pay lip service to doing things differently. But the problem is the attitude of many today that would be part of that whole movement is, if you disagree or if you dare think for yourself, well, we're going to brand you a heretic in the sense of the word, or there's another term for it is called the cancel culture, that we're going to attack anybody who dares to think differently or have some different viewpoints than we do. And one example, I guess there was a new series that's on a streaming service. It was exclusively released onto a streaming service. And I don't know what the storyline, or I guess it's based on a Stephen King novel or something like that. But anyway, apparently one of the characters is deaf and mute. And one of the characters, not one of the actors, but one of the characters. And there were people who were getting all bent out of shape, and they were calling for a boycott of this particular show or this network or this streaming service. They were calling for a boycott because they had the audacity to not cast as the actor a real deaf and mute person, a real deaf person. Now, one of the articles I read about that, said that they're kind of forgetting that this is called acting. It is called acting. You don't have to have a deaf person to play a deaf person. Now, if that's what they choose, and apparently maybe they didn't even have any deaf people audition for it, so maybe there were some issues that maybe they could have done better. But we live in such a society where people are just so much more easily offended at things and get outraged. And now because of social media and because of this mob mentality, this activist mentality, it's not just I privately disagree, or I might even voice my disagreement to a certain degree. I need to go on a crusade. We have modern day crusades. I need to go on a crusade to have my way, to stamp out this particular injustice. Well, the problem is, what if your idea of the injustice is a little bit skewed? Then you're doing great damage in a society. And so think about the Catholic Church and their crusades and the Inquisition. Their idea of what was actually true religion was off base. And so they're doing something in the name of God, in the name of true religion, what they think is true, and yet they're causing great damage to society and to the people, and I mean, taking many, many lives based on error. And so it's important to get back to this idea of liberty of thought, that people should be encouraged to think for themselves. Now, I'm not talking about that we worship reason or we just trust in our own thought processes, but it's a good thing for us to be able to think for ourselves and not just not parrot what is propagated, but to actually think for ourselves, think through things, and come to the truth that way. But the age of innocence was one of terror to all liberty of thought and worship. And I went to church. There's still, the Bible is still very clear about sound doctrine. So we need to take a stand for sound doctrine. But at the same time, as one preacher said, he said, "I'm not threatened by thinking people." But those who are power hungry are threatened by thinking people. And the popes, they were threatened by thinking people, because if people started thinking for themselves and realizing, kind of breaking out of that, where they had where they had breaking out of that mold of what they had pushed to them of all, what is what are these heretics? Boy, they believe the Bible, so they're heretics. Once people started breaking free from that thought, that's a great threat to the power structure. And so he desired to force his will upon everyone, and declared that those who refused to submit to Rome's doctrine should forfeit their lives. He forbade the people to read the Bible in their own language. Schaff, in the History of the Christian Church, said, Innocent, quote, declared that as by the old law, the beast... Now listen to this. Talk about getting your doctrine a little mixed up. The beast touching the holy mount was to be stoned to death, so simple and uneducated men were not to touch the Bible or venture to preach its doctrines. That's a lot twisted. But he forbade the people to read the Bible in their own language. Now, one of the things today, and this is also an ongoing controversy, is when it comes to people thinking for themselves. We do live in a challenging day because we do live in a society where people still, to a great degree, are free to think for themselves. There's a lot of stuff that gets passed around that's there's a lot of just things that are not true that people pass around on Facebook, social media, on YouTube, and there's just a lot of misinformation out there. So what's happening is there are people who recognize that as misinformation, and so their answer is we need to stamp out this misinformation. And I'm concerned by so much misinformation as well. A relative, a relative that we asked prayer for on Wednesday night, was getting into the thinking that there is, I just wanted to talk to you because I don't know how long we're going to have cell phone connection, how long we'll be able to communicate because, I don't even know what all the, it was basically, I just want to talk to you because I don't know how long we're going to even be able to communicate anymore. Now, this person was getting into some things that there's no basis at this point. I'm not saying that would never happen. It's not that those things conceivably couldn't happen, but the person's mind is going off into some areas where they're being influenced by people who are peddling in fear and conspiracy that is not really based on any actual fact at this moment in time. Not to say there's certainly crazy things that can happen, crazy things do happen, but what is the answer? Well, the answer is, for some people, we need to just stamp out all misinformation, where people should be able to think for themselves and be able to sift through, and that's what we should be encouraging people to do. And then we'll stop with this last one here. Last two. He persecuted the Waldenses due to their reading Peter Waldo's Bible translation. What a crime, reading a Bible translation from Peter Waldo. But that was one thing he didn't like about the Waldenses. And then he began the Crusades against the heretics. Not only were the Crusades against the Muslims in Palestine, but they were also against separatist Bible believers. And so they were trying to reclaim land from the Muslims in Palestine, or the area of land of Israel. But they also had crusades against the separatist Bible believers. So we're going to have to stop there with the expansion by Pope Innocent III. And but we'll keep going. There'll be more expansion, and we'll get into more of this next week. But it's important that we get back to, and it's especially true now. What's a lot of the persecution done? It's not done so much by the Catholic Church in these days, although maybe that's because they just don't have the power to right now. But if they had the power, would they do it? Maybe not. But there are actually Catholics in Muslim countries that face persecution by Muslims, and so it's kind of the shoe is on the other foot now. Where there are Muslims going on these, especially the most radical ones, who are fighting for their cause and fighting for Allah. They are trying to stamp out what's called Christianity, and it's very concerning. So, in any regard, we should be for freedom of thought, freedom of religion. The people can think for themselves and come to their own beliefs. And of course, we strongly urge people to believe the Bible. And we believe in teaching and preaching the Bible. But it's not, well, you better believe the Bible or I'm going to throw you in prison or kill you or punch you or, all those kinds of things. All right. Did you have a...
I was on David Cloud's website recently and I was looking at the Friday news. Did you notice that he had the Pope issues another heretical document contradicting God's word is the name of the article. But the Pope sent out a letter calling for world unity. I mean,
Yes, yeah.
I do believe that the Catholic Church is behind this in a lot more than we even think.
Yeah.
They're just doing it in a way that is nice.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, they are. And the question is, and the thing is, a lot of this stuff is behind the scenes, is how much are the other world leaders aligned with that, as far as directly with the Pope? Or is the Pope, or do they all happen to just be on the same team because they are serving the same master? and that's where, and it could be both. Yeah, it could be, and yeah, there could definitely be elements of both there. But this particular Pope is definitely taking the Catholic Church in a more strongly globalist direction. Communist, basically, whatever you want to call it. But it's not hard to see how there are many powers that be are working together to formulate their global. And I did see that. Yeah, I do read those Friday news notes, and that was didn't surprise me coming from this Pope, or really any other Pope, but particularly this Pope. But they definitely are putting forth an agenda, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this particular Pope is a Jesuit, first Jesuit Pope.